By the end of the period today, your goal is to outline your informational essay. The first thing I want for you to do is to take out your composition notebook, open to 2 blank pages. Title the page Informational Essay Outline, and then create this outline. You're going to want to make sure that you leave enough space after each title so that you have room to write in your topic sentences and each piece of evidence. So our first step in outlining our essay is going to be to choose what each of these paragraphs are going to be about. And so we're going to use our bucket form that we have filled in our groups. So in your groups, you filled in, you titled each bucket with one of the impacts or effects of climate change, and then one of the ways your country is addressing or adapting to climate change. So right now what you're going to do is you're going to choose 3 of those buckets to be the topics of each of your body paragraphs. So how do you choose which buckets you want to write about? So the first question that's going to really help you choose the right buckets is to think about which of the buckets you really understand. It's going to be so important that you're able to effectively explain that topic, whether that's an impact or whether that's one of the ways your country is addressing or adapting to climate change. It's so important that you can really explain it. So if you don't understand it, then don't choose that bucket. Question 2 is which do you have the strongest evidence for? So look at which buckets you have the most tallies for, or which buckets you have the strongest evidence for, of the evidence that you most understand. So I looked back at my buckets and I chose 3 that I really understood and that I had really strong evidence for. The first is the flooding of coastal towns and cities. Then how salt is ruining the soil along the Nile Delta because of sea levels rising. And then the third is one of the ways Egypt is adapting to climate change, and they're adapting through new growing practices or new agricultural practices. Notice that 2 of my body paragraphs, or 2 of the buckets that I chose, are about the impacts of climate change, and one of them is about one of the ways my country is addressing or adapting to climate change. You also need to write about 2 impacts and one way your country is addressing or adapting. Okay, so step 2 is to choose your evidence. So when you think about how to choose the best evidence, you want to think about which evidence discusses only one bucket, is short, it should be 1 to 2 sentences, and it needs to be really easy to understand. So you're going to choose 2 pieces of evidence for each of your buckets. And so when you look at a piece of evidence, I want you to think about first, does it discuss only one bucket? So let's look at a piece of evidence that discusses multiple topics in one. Egypt is a typical example of a developing country that is highly vulnerable to climate change and faces numerous threats to its economic, social, and environmental sustainability, including energy, water, and food scarcity. If I want to write about the impacts of climate change on Egypt's economy, or on their social environment, or on the environmental sustainability, this evidence is not going to be good evidence for any of those impacts. So I want to make sure that when I choose a piece of evidence that it's only talking about one topic. I also want to make sure that it's short, like less than 1 to 2 sentences, or not less than, it should be 1 to 2 sentences. It shouldn't be 4 or 5 sentences. So if you have those really long quotes, you can certainly just choose 1 to 2 sentences of that quote. And I want to make sure that it's easy to understand. So here's an example of a piece of evidence that is too long and is really hard to understand or explain. Low self-sufficiency in basic food supplies in Egypt is another risk posed by climate change to Egypt's food security, as Egypt is already the world's 2nd largest importer of wheat. Agricultural production has decreased since 1980 in terms of total cultivated area and productivity per acre, according to the 2013 figures from the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, or Agriculture Organization. Wah, 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 wah. I have no idea what this quote is about. It's too long, and it's really hard to understand and to explain. So I want to make sure that I choose evidence that I really understand, that is fairly short, and that discusses only one topic. So here's an example of 2 pieces of evidence that fit those 3 criteria for my bucket about how salt is ruining the soil along the Nile Delta. two pieces of strong evidence. So let's look at one. Rural farmers say they're already living with the consequences as salty water from the rising Mediterranean pushes into the fertile Nile Delta and contaminates the groundwater used to irrigate crops. It's crystal clear. I really understand from reading this piece of evidence how salt gets into the Nile and how it ruins the soil. Here's another example. Erosion combined with rising sea level sends salt water under the rich, fertile soil south of the Nile Delta. When the water evaporates, the salt remains, making it almost impossible to grow crops. It only discusses how the salt is making it harder to grow in the Nile Delta. It's short, it's 1 to 2 sentences, and it's really easy to understand and explain. So right now I want you to go and I want you to start to think about, look back and decide which 2 pieces of evidence for each bucket, and you can write them in here, which 2 pieces of evidence for each bucket you want to use. Don't worry about your topic sentences yet. That's our step 3. So once you've decided your 2 pieces of evidence, okay, that discuss only one bucket, that are short, and that are easy to understand and explain, you're going to actually write your topic sentences. So a topic sentence is the first sentence of your body paragraph. It is the sentence that states what you're arguing in the paragraph or which topic you're going to really explain and describe in that paragraph. Topic sentences are short, they're clearly stated, and they summarize your argument. So here's an example of one of my topic sentences. This is the example of my topic sentence for this bucket, salt ruining the soil along the Nile Delta. Rising sea levels push salt water into the Nile Delta, devastating agriculture. It's short. It's clearly stated. I, as the reader of that paragraph, can remember that quote as I'm reading the whole paragraph. That's going to be important. And it summarizes my argument really clearly. Let's look at my other 2 topic sentences. So when I look at my outline, so I've filled this in my composition notebook, this whole outline, this is what it ends up looking like. Topic sentence 1. Coastal cities and towns will lose a significant portion of their coastline. I've chosen 2 pieces of evidence that strongly support that topic sentence. Topic sentence number 2. Rising sea levels push saltwater into the Nile Delta, devastating agriculture. Here I've actually chosen 3 because that's what I had. I'm not quite sure which 2 I want to use yet, but these are 3 that fit my criteria for really good evidence. And then topic sentence number 3, Egyptian farmers are developing new technologies and practices for growing. Notice I only have 1 piece of evidence right now for topic sentence 3. That's going to be something I'm going to need to find later. Right now I only had 1 that fit my criteria for really strong evidence. Okay, right now I want for you to go and outline your essay. Once you're done, raise your hand. I'll come check it off and you can get started writing your body paragraphs. Have fun!